Nepal is exposed to a number of natural hazards. The most serious of them include floods, landslides, fires, and earthquakes. Therefore, on the 24th of September 2017, the Nepal Parliament passed a law that clearly defines a procedure for handling such risks at all levels of governance, from the central level to the level of each locality. The important components of this law include the principle of public awareness and a comprehensive approach towards risk management. For the first time in the history of Nepal, the state has assumed responsibility for flood risk management. In the Formtes project, we were mainly interested in two things: how flood risk management is carried out directly on a local level in Nepal, and how feasible it is to align the use of technologies with public as well as private interests. In other words, we were wondering in what way technological processes were based on local, historical acquired knowledge, and how the city and country dwellers were involved in the entire process. Our field survey focused on floods in big cities in the Kathmandu Valley and in rural Nepal, specifically in the Dang Valley. In the past, the water cycle management in big cities of Nepal, such as Kathmandu, Patan and Bhaktapur, was delicately interwoven with religious practices and feasts. Floods were an exceptional occurrence. Rainwater was retained in the landscape and infiltrated through systems of artificial lakes, pokhari, and canals, at the same time using the semi-permeable surface of the city's community squares, gardens and paths. At the same time, rainwater infiltration, along with the exploitation of distant sources, ensured sufficient recharge of the shallow aquifers that were used for supplying drinking as well as sanitary water to the population through systems of water spouts, hiti, and wells. The inflow of migrants to big cities, which undermined the religious and traditional practices and, at the same time, brought an increase in water demand as well as in land prices, led to a destabilization of the water cycle. The city patterns gradually changed. The original pokhari were drained and used for construction. Farmland along rivers was built up, so that the rivers could not easily expand into the floodplains anymore during the monsoon season. Streets were made wider and covered with impermeable surfaces. The original rainwater infiltration systems were not maintained anymore and became clogged with garbage. The construction of new engineering infrastructure and water mains damaged the water supply systems for some hiti and disrupted the drainage of excess water in the process. The new way of management of big cities in the Kathmandu Valley resulted not only in a shortage of drinking and sanitary water sources, but also in local floods taking place in the monsoon period. At those times, rainwater accumulates in cities without a possibility of infiltration or drainage. Moreover, swelling rivers such as Bagmati in Kathmandu and Hanumanti in Bhaktapur burst their banks and destroy the migrants' slums, which were built illegally on municipal land right on the riverbanks. It is high time to tackle the situation and, in cooperation with the communities, start discussing the possibilities of how to carry out flood management measures in accordance with the local customs. An example of adverse effects resulting from poorly managed city development may be this year's flood in Bhaktapur, where as little as 100 millimeters of precipitation fell during a day. We talked about the causes of the local floods with a resident family that runs a restaurant called Kusi, right in the epicenter of the floods. Mr. Hom Thapa and his wife Geeta Thapa Karel spoke about the torrential rain that fell in the night and the flood that came in the morning. They showed us the level the flood reached. As the cause of the flooding, they blame a new road, which runs through Bhaktapur above the ground so that the road embankment prevents rainwater runoff. rainwater does not infiltrate into the ground because the area has been built up with a new shopping centre and a religious centre. Development activities along with slum shacks that prevent the river from expanding into the floodplain can also be seen along the Hanumante River. Immediately after the flood, the affected communities started to protest against the structures that increased flood risks, however, with no effect. The farmland alongside the river had passed into private ownership of the development companies and the construction continues. The slums will not be removed, as their inhabitants, because of their social position, have no means of owning land and moving to a safer area. So far, there is no tool available in Nepal that can be used by the communities in their protests and efforts for resettlement, so that eventually everything settled down and life goes on, until the next flood. In the country, on the other hand, the causes of the floods are different. We set out for the Dang Valley in the southwest of Nepal, through which the Babai River with 11 tributaries flows, carrying water from the surrounding mountains and hills. The Dang Valley suffers from regular floods both in areas of its tributaries and at their confluence with the Babai River. During the floods, the river expands dramatically and destroys everything that stands in its way. However, this year, the Babai River is as gentle as a lamb. Nobody would suspect it of being that devastating large river. Its potential strength is only indicated by the rest of the sediments deposited by last year's flood. In the Tulsipur region, we visited two communities that were severely affected by the floods in 2014 and 2017. The community in Motipur is large, having 619 inhabitants as of summer 2018. This community is used to having the attention of donors, both from Nepal and abroad, so that the welcome ceremony was well arranged and based on the appearance of Motipur's leader, Mr. Tilak Bahadur Basnet. He presented a handwritten speech, several pages long, which had probably been heard by a number of foreign visitors already. The interest in Motipur is justified. In 2014, 2 people were killed and 49 houses destroyed by a flood. Based on the flood experience, a flood prevention action plan was created in cooperation with the District Emergency Operational Centre Dang. In addition, Flood Disaster Management Committee of Motipur was set up consisting of various groups to ensure communication in times of flood danger and the residents' preparedness for emergency situations, as well as to perform the rescue operations themselves and the quantification of damage, if there is any. Thanks to the government, as well as local and international donors, the village, its damaged roads and irrigation ditches were renovated, and the construction of a levee was launched in 2017. Apart from climate change, which impacts the monsoon rainfall patterns, the main causes of the disastrous floods in Motipur have been given as follows: deforestation of the hills above Motipur, limestone extraction and, above all, farmland abandonment, due to the migration of younger people to cities and for better paid jobs abroad. For instance, in the United Arab Emirates, the agricultural land lays fallow and soil permeability decreases. In addition, without maintenance, the irrigation ditches become clogged and constitute a secondary cause of flooding. Fulvari, another community in the Tulsipur region, is one of the many small communities affected by the floods. That is not sufficiently assertive, however, to direct the attention of the Nepalese donors to its problems, and therefore depends on damage compensation by the state. Nevertheless, the Fulvari residents are not satisfied with the way this compensation is carried out, as they obtained only a small portion of the financial aid for the reconstruction or construction of new houses that had been promised to them. As a result, they still live in damaged houses that may collapse at any time. or they had to abandon their home and move to makeshift shelters or even sleep in the community woods. We visited Tulsipur's head, Mr. Ghanshyama Padni, to find out how the flood situation and its solution is viewed by a local leader. The most crucial problem, says Ghanshyam Padni, is the abandonment of farmland. Therefore, he welcomes a new law that encourages the rental of farmland through a system of subsidies. He hopes that another system will be in place in the future that would monitor the effectiveness of the flood damage compensation by the state and would oversee the distribution of these aids. At the present time, 70 to 80% of flood victims are the same people. Land ownership is very important in rural Nepal, as land is passed down through generations. Even if a family moves away from the floodplain, they will not give up the land. This has a positive aspect because land is not sold to development companies and built up, as is the case in bigger towns. To sum it up, if we are to find a solution to the floods, we must find their causes and define the flood areas. But even if we delimit flood areas, there still is no functional tool in Nepal to take advantage of this information. At present, we need to focus on flood prevention, public awareness and timely prevention of flood protection measures. Define a land use policy with clearly delimited responsibilities and tasks, and set up a fair method of flood damage compensation. In cities, we need to focus on the possibilities of resettling the migrants and socially vulnerable groups from risk areas to new homes. After all, what could happen in Bhaktapur if 260 millimeters of precipitation falls in a day, as was the case in 1990? Or if torrential rain comes down in Kathmandu with 540 millimeters of precipitation in one day, as happened in 1993? The situation will be disastrous. It is necessary to act before it is too late. Hopefully, this will also be aided by the implementation of the Risk Reduction Law.